Okay, so Gary, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about watching video to get better at jiu-jitsu. And the first one is, do you watch video to learn techniques?
Yeah. So I think it's like a really underestimated part of our martial art, especially now that it's so easy to access with the internet, YouTube, and everything like that. It's so much easier now than it ever was before to watch high-level competitors using the techniques that we learn each and every day. It's just very much underutilized, I think, from an instructor standpoint and from a student or a competitor standpoint in terms of getting better. Even myself, I get so wrapped up in just going into training every day and doing the moves and learning from my teacher. I'm not going to say that that's not very, very important, and it is. All right, but another added thing that I could be doing even more often than I do is watching footage of high level grapplers doing the things that we're trying to learn and that teachers are trying to teach, and it gives you a little bit more insight into how things work. Mostly because you're getting to see people do it under really high resistance situations. I think one of the main places I actually been watching a lot of tape in recently has been in judo. Because I do train jiu-jitsu most of the time. I do a little bit of wrestling. I have a wrestling coach, but that's something that I get to practice a little bit. But we don't have too many people. It's not like I'm just going to a straight up judo class where somebody's just teaching me judo. John shows a few techniques. I've learned a few techniques from other people and from a wrestling coach. It's not something I get on a consistent basis like jiu-jitsu every day, right? So there's something a little bit lacking when it comes to really understanding the fundamental concepts. And not just that, my training partners aren't using it on me that much as well either because they don't understand it that much. So I really outreach and I try to watch like a lot of Olympic level judo competition when I'm studying a particular move to learn how somebody really does it in a high level scenario. So that's just like a good example for me, especially because it's something outside the realm of what I do every day, that it really helps me get a lot better, I think, in some of my techniques. It's just watching other really high level people doing it. They did a study, I forget exactly at what university, with basketball players. For sure. They had them do free throws. And one set of the basketball players was told to just practice doing the free throws. They all practiced doing the free throws for the same amount of time as another control group, which instead of just practicing the free throws, they would practice the free throws for half the amount of time the other group would, and the other half of the time they would watch other people completing successful free throws. And it turned out that at the end, when they tested the two groups, that the group that was actually watching people complete successful free throws and practicing did a little bit better than the group that just practiced all the time. So it gives you a little bit more perspective on what you're doing, I think, watching tape. And it's, now it's been scientifically proven that it helps for sure.
And who are some of the competitors or people that you're watching a lot right now? Could you name a few of them?
Well, I can't name any of the ones in judo because I haven't paid too much attention to that. I just kind of, I'm not very specific. I just, type in Olympic level, Ogoshi or, Tayatoshi or something like that, and I haven't really studied specifics on, different judo competitors. When it comes to jiu-jitsu, I think that I spent the most time watching tape on the things I knew the least about. So for instance, leg locking at first was very, very foreign to me. Didn't really have a good concept of it. So I studied Pujares the most because he seemed to have the most severe breaks in competition. And, in MMA and things, which I've obviously planned to transition to. So it seemed like the most obvious direction to go. Because I had a lot of trouble with the outside heel hook, and that's most of the leg locking submissions he finishes are outside heel hooks. And it gave me a little bit of insight, I have to say, on what's actually happening, and it kind of supplemented what my instructor was already telling me. There were certain details that John would go over, and then when I watched Pujares do them, I was like, oh, that's why John has us do these things. I can see him using the concepts that I was learning, and then it just backs up what I'm already doing, whereas before, it's almost like when your parents just tell you to do something, and you don't really have any frame of reference for why, and then somebody else tells you to do it, or you see somebody else doing it, and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense now, but you didn't want to listen to your mom. Of course not, you know what I mean? So it's like, John may say something to me and Eddie, or whoever we're training, and it's like, all right, John, whatever, and then we watch somebody do it, or I see it done live, or somebody does it to me, and I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I think that that's really what helps. But yeah, I think Pujares was a big one. I did, in terms of leg locking guys, I think that was mainly who I focused on. I watched actually a lot of Eddie's tape too. And some of my opponents actually, Imanari, and I'm trying to think of the last, Marcin Held. They also have some really good innovations in different directions. Instead of outside heel hooking, they put things together a little bit differently. They're a little bit more creative. They transition to a couple different positions. So I think most of my tape studying has been there. And then obviously some of my opponents. So any of my opponents that I've ever faced, I definitely do some tape study just to see what they're good at,
Cool. And when you watch, do you ever watch video of yourself competing, and do you ever watch video of yourself training?
Yeah,
it's
a good question. I don't watch a huge amount of video of me just training. I do it now with sparring because I'm trying to improve my stand-up a lot. I do that with sparring. I probably should do it a little bit more with jiu-jitsu training. Again, it just kind of comes down to, how much time is in a day sort of thing, where I'm training all day and I'm just like, I probably should, videotape some of this, watch it. And occasionally I do it. It definitely gives me some insight. But I could definitely do it more. I definitely watch some tape of myself competing, and it's always like a little weird, like standing aside and like watching yourself compete. When you're in there, it always seems like it looks different or it feels different, And then you watch it from the outside, it's just a different perspective. You see yourself actually doing everything. It definitely helps improve your game. You can see your shortcomings, even maybe things that you didn't notice during the match was a shortcoming. You can look at it from the outside and be like, oh man, that was definitely a mistake right there. I'm lucky he didn't do this. It might not have felt that way during the match, but you can actually, when you take things back and you visually see it, it definitely helps a lot. So it's definitely a big part of what we do and getting better, I think. So if you ever hit like a plateau and this isn't something that you already do, watching tape with a technique or with, a series of techniques or a position, if you're ever really hitting a plateau, I think this is definitely something you could do to possibly, push yourself past that and get a little bit better if it wasn't something you were already doing.
Thanks, Garry.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.